I think one of the great challenges in memory research and in brain science more generally is to understand which regions of the brain are involved in or participate in the storage of memory. Now, this is not a new issue. There's a long history of research on this topic. Perhaps the most famous episode in this history comes from the studies of Carl Lashley. He tried to determine which brain regions were involved by removing different portions of the brain, hoping to find out just where in the brain memory was stored, or where in the brain the lasting traces of experience, which he called the engram, were located.
Carl Lashley's experiments in the 1920s were performed on laboratory rats. First, the rats were trained to remember the route through a tricky maze into a courtyard where a bowl of food awaited them. Then, Lashley surgically removed a section of their brains and retested them through the maze.
He found that performance on the maze deteriorated as a function of how much brain damage was produced. If he removed a large portion of the cortex, then the animal is likely to have forgotten how to get through the maze. If he removed smaller portions of cortex, however, the animal was likely to be affected not at all. The animal did just fine. And it didn't matter which portion of cortex he removed. The animal's performance seemed unharmed. This led Lashley to conclude that there was no localization of memory storage in the brain, that there was no critical spot which, when damaged, produced loss of memory. Indeed, it led Lashley to wonder how it was even possible for the brain to support learning and memory. This is a challenge that's been taken up by current researchers ever since.
Several decades later, Donald Hebb worked with yet another pioneer in the science of memory, Dr. Wilder Penfield. As a practicing neurosurgeon, Penfield developed several new surgical procedures. He was also fascinated with the way the brain stored memories. Some of his operations called for him to stimulate the brain's surface, and sometimes he seemed to elicit memories. His findings, at odds with Lashley's, indicated to him that memories were stored in one spot, the temporal lobe. He shared this hypothesis with one of his patients in 1949.
It was 11 years ago that you were here. And you had as a little girl, around 7, an illness that left its mark. And so you began to have attacks, which began, I remember you telling me, with a feeling of fear.
That's right.
You remember we studied you with the X-ray, with electrograms, saw the pattern of your attack, and there was only one place it could be, and that's right here in your right temporal region. And so we opened it up there, didn't we?
Yes.
Under local anesthesia. Do you remember the pain?
There was no pain.
Well, that's good. It's nice of you to say so, anyway.
Well, there wasn't.
Penfield, like many current neurosurgeons, did not remove any portion of the cortex without first electrically stimulating the portion of the brain where he was going to operate. The idea is that the electrical stimulation temporarily disrupts the normal workings of that portion of the brain, permitting him to get an idea in advance of the surgery of what sort of disruption he's likely to confront.
This is the brain. Now, when we stimulated at 3, you had a tingling in your thumb. You've probably forgotten now.
Not very clear.
Then underneath this, we stimulated, and to my astonishment, you said, "I hear music." Then I repeated it without warning you a little while later. You said, "I hear that music again." Tell us what you heard.
Well, I heard what sounded like an orchestra playing, and I asked the nurse where it was coming from, and she asked me the name of it. But I said, I know the song, but I can't think of the name of it.
Will you hum it now? You remember it?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Da 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 da.
Penfield obtained these results only from the temporal lobes, and so he concluded that memory storage was in the temporal lobes. But the problem with this is that he never actually verified that the incidents reported by the patients ever actually occurred, or that they occurred as reported by the patients.
Penfield's work was certainly important, but it's now believed his conclusions were wrong. Memories are not stored in one exclusive region of the brain, but in many. Most of Carl Lashley's theories were wrong too, but at least one of his ideas still makes sense.
The storage of memories in the brain, just as Lashley concluded, cannot be localized so discretely. There is no special place in the brain that acts as the storehouse for memories. There are, it turns out, portions of the brain that are critical for memory, places such as the hippocampal system. But on current accounts, memory storage seems to be distributed across the cortex wherever the processing of information occurs, so that different aspects or elements of an event are stored in a distributed fashion across the different regions of the cortex responsible for those different aspects of processing.
If we could look inside the brain, we'd find that memories are stored biologically. They're wired into the brain's basic circuitry, its nerve cells. A smile, an urge, a whisper. In all of these, an electrical current in a neuron stimulates the release of chemicals. These chemicals either excite or inhibit another neuron. This process is the key to learning and memory. The hippocampus probably serves learning as much as it serves memory. It is, for instance, the brain region from which the classroom lesson is dispatched and possibly retrieved. But what happens to that lesson after it's been passed on by the hippocampus? What happens to the nerve cells that store it? In Charget's lab in Paris, he and his team have been observing the process of learning in the growing brains of rats. Their experiments have shown that while learning encourages the creation of some neuronal connections, learning also involves the paring down or elimination of other connections. And so pathways between cells become more effective in transmitting messages.
In the adult, there is only one synapse per muscle fiber. In the newborn, about 3 to 4.
In baby rats, at least, excess synapses, those gaps between nerve cells, are often discarded as learning advances. And an assembly of brain cells seems to rid itself of detours so that newly learned memories can be stored and retrieved efficiently.
The elimination of some synapses would create order. Thus, the idea that learning being associated with the stabilization of some synapses and the elimination of other ones, learning would be to eliminate an excess.
Learning, therefore, involves in part the streamlining of connections between nerve cells. Now, what about the myth which claims that after the age of 25, the human brain loses 1,000 brain cells a day? Donald Hebb is skeptical.
In spite of the loss of brain cells, the steady loss from the age of 25 or so onward gives a strange picture. What it gives you is a picture of someone who gets smarter and smarter, more and more efficient as he or she gets older, and yet is losing brain cells at the same time. what seems to be going on is that with age, there are some cells lost, but on the other hand, the individual is making better use of what he has.
As you're sitting there at this table with me now, indeed, are you sending electrical patterns down certain pathways? And those electrical patterns are producing a structural change in your brain right now. Are you indeed physically rearranging your circuitries?
Dr. Gary Lynch, like others, believes that all learning, from the comprehension of a new word to the conceptualization of an idea, should leave a biological trail through the brain. It makes good sense to believe that the adding and subtracting of neuronal connections is what reinforces pathways and helps make lessons truly learned. But can such a process be observed under a microscope?
What we're saying here is that an event which lasts half a second, within 5 to 10 minutes has produced a structural change that in some ways is as profound as the changes that one sees after damage. So, now we have a new ball game.
For Gary Lynch, the new ball game was an experiment in which sections of rat brains were monitored before and after electrical stimulation. The jolt of electricity administered by his team of researchers is similar to what our brain cells experience with each new idea, word, lesson, or thought. Would the electrical charge actually change the neurons themselves? Detailed electron micrographs allowed Lynch's team to see cells before and after the stimulation. If there was going to be any change at all, it was bound to occur here, along the dark line, the synapse. Jean-Pierre Changeux had discovered that some synapses are eliminated. Would Gary Lynch find that others are created?
The first 8, 9, 10 months of this project, we found nothing. Every variable that we looked for, every change that we thought was there, upon further examination, disappears, right?
But in the 11th month, Gary Lynch and his team suddenly observed dramatic changes in certain cells. They had actually grown new synaptic connections with other cells. Before his eyes was the biological evidence that learning involves a physical change in the circuitry of the brain. Dr. Eric Kandel at Columbia University has spent most of his professional life working to understand how transmissions between neurons result in learning and memory. His work has contributed greatly to our understanding of the activities of the neuron as it produces and secretes transmitting substances into the synaptic cleft. He has identified compounds which trigger activity in other neurons and examined the factors which make connections plastic or changeable with experience. Dr. Kandel's research is probably best known for its use of the marine snail Aplysia. This snail is especially useful for the study of learning at the cellular level. Its neural system is relatively simple and its neurons are large. Most importantly, Aplysia makes observable changes in its behavior as it learns, allowing researchers to look for corresponding changes in individual neurons.
We now have gotten to appreciate the universality of biological processes. So, for example, we've been interested in a mechanism whereby short-term memory is switched to long-term memory. And we found that this involves synthesis of new proteins, the turning on of genes, and the growth of new synaptic connections. The specific molecules involved, the cyclic AMP-dependent signaling pathway in the cell, the CREB transcriptional factors in the nucleus, and even some of the proteins involved in the growth of new synaptic connection turn out to be operative in Drosophila, where people used a completely different approach to tackle the problem. Moreover, the early findings that are emerging in the mouse from Alcino Silva's work and ours suggest that very similar molecules are operative in the mouse as well. So it gives one more and more confidence, of course, as we have reason to believe from study of development, from study of immune processes, that biological processes are amazingly conserved. So if you work out the details in any one organism, you're likely to define steps that are of general importance. And if you work on 2 or 3 related organisms, you're very likely to be in a position for delineating the outlines of the mechanism underlying a particular component that you're interested in.
In many ways, memory is what defines the richness of our lives. It provides an anchor between the past, the present, and the future. Without memory, there is only a vague understanding of one's existence and only a foggy notion of one's life. Memory problems are the most common difficulty reported by people with neurological disorders or brain injuries. These memory failures can involve different parts of the brain, depending on the type of memory problem the person experiences. This is Mike. He knows about memory loss because he has a condition called amnesia. A unique role in human memory is played by the hippocampus, a structure in the temporal lobe that overlies the brainstem. When the hippocampus alone is damaged, as in Mike's case, memories of experiences before the injury are fairly well retained. But there is an almost complete inability to add memories of personal experiences or events in the outside world. Meanwhile, other cognitive skills remain relatively intact.
I have known Mike for almost 12 years. I first met him about 2 years after his memory problems developed. At the time, he was having a great deal of depression because his memory problems were significantly interfering with his life and with his ability to work. Mike's accident happened when he was a junior in high school, and in a car accident he suffered a back fracture. At the time of the accident, he was an AB student. He was very active in sports, and he was president of his junior class. The problems that developed which caused damage to his hippocampus actually occurred about 4 months after the accident. Because of medical complications, he had an episode of seizure that lasted for 24 hours, and then he lapsed into a coma. He was comatose for 2 weeks, awakened, and was then alert for 2 weeks. He then had a seizure that lasted for a couple of minutes and lapsed into coma for another 2 weeks. These events led to damage to his hippocampus.
Mike went on to recover physically, although he still has some occasional partial seizures. With rehabilitation, his cognitive abilities returned to normal, except for his memory. Mike has extremely poor recall of his experiences since 1983. Mike's memory difficulties are interesting because he has trouble remembering things people tell him and recent experiences. But when it comes to working with his hands, he seems to have no problem.
I think the difference is hands-on. The more I touch it, the more it's imprinted upon the brain. Word of mouth, it just seems like it just blows on by. You've really got to grab it and touch it. To live independently, I do everything in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 step. I get up in the morning, I take my phenobarb and my Prozac. I go take a shower. You know, I feed the cat. It's in a 1, 2, 3, and at 2 o'clock I go to work. At 10 o'clock, you know, I'm filling vending machines. I do it in a sequence that is consistent every single day, 7 days a week, as much as I possibly can. When you throw something in there like a 11 into the 1, 2, 3, 11, 4, 5, 6, I start losing track of things. Even though my memory has gotten a little bit better, when I sit there and I trust my memory one time, it'll let me down. It'll leave me standing cold. There might be times I'll go for 2 or 3 days and remember quite a bit. And then the one time I trust it, boom, it'll drop me like a rock. So I've got to pull it out, even though I think I can't forget it, and I've got to write it down. Exactly. Not just, it was George that stopped by. It was George at 7 a.m., Tuesday morning, March 26, 1996, and he was talking about fishing and he wanted a rod. It's got to be explicit, detailed. If it's not detailed, it won't mean anything to me.
Mike's future, I am sure, is going to be pretty good because he is a determined person. He wants a good life and he's willing to work for it, even though he has a lot of difficulty. There are things that have to be very structured, and we have to write things down for him. If his dad and I weren't here tomorrow, that is a big worry because he does look to us for a lot of advice. And he went through a period of time when he knew it all and didn't want any advice from us, but he's matured a lot, and he does expect us to be there when he needs us, and that's really important. If we're not here, one of the blessings with Mike is that he makes a lot of friends, and he has a lot of really good friends that understand his problem, and they work with him all the time, and we feel pretty comfortable that if we were gone, they'd take care of him.
Mike has been able to assume a normal work life by acquiring a job that does not require his hippocampal memory system. He's an injection molder at a rubber company.
Well, Michael's been employed here with Artemis for right at a year, and he is an injection molding operator. We taught him the packaging routine. We've taught him how to troubleshoot and diagnose certain equipment, fix problems, know what the material is to do or not to do. He's come a long ways in the last year that he's been here. I'll have to say this, that he carries a great deal of notepads and paper with him. Pencils, he has to document a lot in order to not forget. He's one of the very few that has a good initiative about him. He wants to learn, and he tries to figure the problem out before he asks. He's a very good worker. Probably one of the best workers that I have.
Researchers have been interested in determining how the hippocampus is involved in the storage of new memories. It now appears that the memories are not stored in the hippocampus. Instead, the hippocampus, in collaboration with other structures, consolidates memories in areas of the cortex that participate in the formation of experiences. One possibility is being researched by Dr. Bennett and his colleagues at Colorado State University, that an electrical phenomenon in the hippocampus called long-term potentiation, or LTP, reflects the hippocampus's role in memory consolidation. LTP was first discovered following brief, high-frequency electrical stimulation to a pathway leading into the hippocampus. It was discovered that such stimulation produced a long-lasting facilitation of synaptic transmission in the affected cells. A similar phenomenon has been discovered in the cerebral cortex. This finding may provide verification of a theory proposed by Donald Hebb in 1949. Hebb hypothesized that such changes in synaptic excitability during learning are responsible for memory. Many researchers now believe that LTP holds the secret for how memories are stored in the brain. Their studies have involved rats. It is important for rats to remember the spatial locations of food or shelter. This ability seems to depend on the hippocampus. Rats are natural swimmers, and they can perform tasks that require swimming without difficulty. The animals are placed in the Morris water maze, a circular tub containing a sitting platform. This apparatus provides an ideal environment for testing memory. Since the water is opaque, the rat cannot see the platform. Animals are placed into the water from various starting points to test their ability to remember the location of the platform. A computer displays and records the animal's path, the location of the platform, and the time it takes the rat to find it. Rats treated with the drug dextromethorphan, which blocks the development of LTP in the hippocampus, never remember the location of the submerged platform. They seem to swim around aimlessly in the tub until they are removed.
It's for the 1989 Ford Bronco.
We are now beginning to understand how memories are stored in the brain, but this understanding is still primitive. The human memory system probably has a limitless capacity. Information that is years old can be retrieved quickly and efficiently. Our hopes and plans for the future are based on our memories of yesterday and today. It is difficult to imagine what life would be like without memory. When this film was made, Eleanor, at age 51, was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, a terminal illness with no known cure.
I'm forgetful. I say something and then I can say it right after that and not know that I've said it. And that's not too comfortable a feeling.
Both for her own sake and to help others study Alzheimer's, she joined a research program at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. There she was studied by Dr. Barry Gordon until her death.
I didn't really know what Alzheimer's was. I know better now because I've been reading a lot of things about it. But it's kind of scary.
Alzheimer's ultimately is defined as a global deterioration of an individual's personality and mind. The symptoms typically develop late in life, and they represent a significant change from the person's prior well-established abilities. Near the center of the brain is a tiny cluster of cells called the nucleus basalis. It's the headquarters for neurons that run throughout the cortex. Those neurons carry a chemical transmitter, acetylcholine, that causes other neurons to fire. In Alzheimer's, the nucleus basalis seems to deteriorate. An entire system of cells begins to develop plaques and tangles that interfere with chemical transmission. Then the cells begin to die. When the nucleus basalis and its connections disappear, the cortex literally becomes starved for excitation, and its cells, in turn, begin to die.
Something is going wrong where the nerve cells are gradually dying and their processes are dying. We know that that takes place in many regions throughout the brain, but there are some regions in particular that seem to bear the brunt of it and cause a lot of the problems that patients with Alzheimer's have. Damage that occurs in the inner part of the temporal lobes, the hippocampus and other structures, seems to contribute to the memory problem that patients with Alzheimer's have and that they typically start out having. Damage in the parietal and temporal regions on both sides, on the left, seems to be associated with the language problems that patients with Alzheimer's have. On the right is more associated with the problems they have with vision in space, where they may lose themselves in space or not recognize familiar things or people. The dysfunction and damage occurring in the frontal lobes seems to be associated with the poor judgment and lack of insight that many patients with Alzheimer's have. And there still is the damage in the nucleus basalis and other structures, which may be contributing to all those other kinds of problems because it's depriving the cortex of acetylcholine, which is kind of an activator for the brain.
Frontal lobe involvement in Alzheimer's disease can be demonstrated using the PET scan. This PET scan shows the activity of the frontal lobes in a normal brain at the top of the picture. This scan of the brain of an Alzheimer's patient whose condition is well advanced shows the frontal lobes almost completely shut down. We can actually see what happens to awareness in inventor Jesse Salb's slow-motion maps of functioning brains. A normal brain on the right and Alzheimer's patient on the left. Both maps will show electrical activity as the brain responds to a sound. This peak of activity and this one are sensory responses, the brain actually hearing the sound. This peak, visible only in the normal brain, marks the point of realization, when the person becomes aware of the sound. The damaged brain of the Alzheimer's patient shows no response at all. At this stage of her disease, Eleanor began to have problems recalling even personal information.
My family, I have 3 sons, 2 sons, Paul and John, 2 sons.
She'll sit down at the piano. In fact, many times I come in during the day and she's sitting down at the piano playing, and she has no problem reading music. She can take the same newspaper, however, and read it 3 times and mention the same article to me on 3 different occasions.
I'm speaking now, almost 12 years after Eleanor was last filmed for the segment that you saw. She lived another 5 years. Her course was marked by progressive deterioration. She went from being able to speak and making some contact with people to the point where she was babbling and not able to understand and unable to be understood. She, however, retained a lot of her social skills and could still be taken frequently by her husband and just brought to the dinner table and so forth. However, her course was also marred, as was typical with Alzheimer's patients, by hallucinations. She began speaking to the chair and seemingly responding to things that nobody could see were there. Upon her passing, she and her family had willed that her brain be examined for research. And at autopsy, her brain did show the typical signs of Alzheimer's disease.
Okay. And I'd like you to try to make that design.
No cure yet exists for Alzheimer's disease. However, research is proceeding along a number of lines to try to treat the disease and ultimately to try to cure it. One important line of research is to realize that many of the problems that Alzheimer's patients have are behavioral and might be taken care of or improved by behavioral treatment. There's also now an approved drug for Alzheimer's disease that works by, we think, boosting the level of acetylcholine within the brain. It's not a wonder drug. It doesn't improve everybody, and in many cases it only stabilizes the patient for a period of time, but at least it's a start. And on the horizon are other different kinds of drugs that are trying to, for example, stop some of the other breakdowns in nerve cells that we think occur in Alzheimer's disease. There's now new clues to the genetics of Alzheimer's disease. There's also been important clues showing that some blood proteins are related to the chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. What the exact significance of that isn't clear, but what it is clear is it gives us a way of tracking who is more likely to have problems and who in a family is more likely to have problems as well. So we're hopeful, again, that the increasing pace of medical research and of therapeutic research will help solve some of the different problems that occur in Alzheimer's patients and maybe get at some of the root problems that these patients have.
For most of us, a 7-digit number is about the limit of our short-term memory. But for Rajan Mahadevan, processing and encoding a 49-number matrix into memory appears as a simple, routine task.
Okay, Rajan, why don't we just start from left to right and go right down the various rows.
9473851 0629154 185273673610280826981 4371256824930.
All right. Would you be able to repeat those backwards? Going from the bottom up.
I'll do the best I can.
All right.
0, 1, 3, 9, 4, 2, 8. That's the last row. 6, 5, 2, 1, 7, 3, 4. So one before that. 1, 8, 9, 6, 2, 80. 8201-637. 6372581. 4519260. 1583749.
Now, not only is it exceptional that you can remember more than 99,000 of the first digits of pi, but you also have the ability to jump in just anywhere at random within these digits, say, for example, at 61,000, at that 61st digit, and can begin sequence from there. So I would like to do that. We do have we do have the values from pi, and I would like to just, without you able to see this, of course, after your years of practice, to just pick out a sequence of approximately 10 digits somewhere within the first, say, 10,000 digits of pi, and then have you pick up for as far as you care to within reasonable uptown. I know you can go for hours, literally. The digit is 2, 7, 8, 8, 6, 5, 9, 3, 6, 1.
Five 818-2796. Sorry, I was a little slow on that. But
no problem.
8230301952 0353018529689957732 25994138891 249721775 83479133151 557485724 45415069595 508295331 6861727 8890750983817546374649393 19393 0604009277 0167113900
I think we get the point. That's good.
Let's address the average college student coming into a university. They have had some experience with memorizing things, lines, formulas, etc. But here they are now taking 4 or 5 courses. They're trying to struggle to read material, to go to class, to memorize, to integrate for examinations, to retrieve information. What advice, knowing what you do about your extraordinary abilities and what you also know about the literature on memory and information processing, what kinds of advice would you give students to assist them in this everyday today process of memorizing material?
Well, the first piece of advice that I would give them is to ask themselves why they are taking a particular course. Many times people take a course because either it's a done thing or they have to do it rather than because they want to do it. And motivation plays a very important role in learning and memory. For example, if you read, say, I can tell the students this, hey, you pick up a book, a 200 or 300 page book, a novel by your favorite author, just read through it once, and you can, just by reading through it once, you will be able to recall a lot of details with amazing clarity, even though you had no intention of memorizing it, because you were motivated to read it and you were into it. Now let's take, say, a page of text from a calculus book. People are going to struggle with that. I mean, the motivation plays a very important role. That's the first thing. The second thing I would tell them is active listening rather than passive listening in the classrooms. By active listening, I mean constantly keep thinking about what the instructor is saying. Hey, what is he saying right now? What's the big picture? Why is he saying it? How is this relevant to all that's gone on in the previous class? Such active listening will help them encode information in the class very efficiently. The third piece of advice that I would give them is, and this takes an incredible amount of motivation too, is that once a class is over, once they've completed, say, an hour of class, ASAP review what went on in the class that very day. And not wait. Even it's amazing how much people can forget, even if they wait for a couple of days. And the advantage of reviewing as soon as possible on that very day is that people are able to see that the connection or the trend that flows from one class to the next as the instructor has organized it, and as students are meant to, assimilate all that information. Attend classes very regularly, and I'd say attend each and every class that you can. And some study tips that I can give, which I think people will find very useful, is context plays a very important role in retrieving information from memory. So it's important to learn a certain piece of information in certain important contexts. For example, I'd say if you study at home, choose one particular room where you can study all the time, so that subliminal, there won't be any sort of subliminal perceptual distractions if people are used to a room. See, and then what happens is when they've recalled that material, they've got to just mentally go back to that context, the room in which they are studying, and they'll be able to retrieve that information. The second piece of advice I'd give is that frequently review your class material in the room in which the class is being conducted. It turns out that that has helped a lot of people in retrieving information from memory, because the classroom again serves as a context. The next piece of advice I give is what psychologists call distributed practice as opposed to mass practice. A distributed practice simply means that do not spend too much time studying a given subject. So like if you said, Frank, if someone has 5 subjects in a semester, when they study those subjects, they should rotate the subjects, maybe read one subject 40 minutes or 50 minutes or 1 hour, and then read an unrelated subject for the next hour, all right? And then either they can go back to the first subject or they can take up a third subject and so on.
And do that frequently.
And do that frequently. That's a lot better than just cramming one subject till people have gotten it down cold. It's a waste of time. Make sure that you review material before an exam. Review the material, say, let's consider the day before an exam. Review all the material for the exam once before you go to sleep. And the first thing after you get up the following morning. It turns out that if people do that, it strengthens memory traces, because during sleep there is very little retroactive or proactive interference. So the information that was scanned or learned just before a person goes to sleep gets consolidated at the period they're sleeping. And then as soon as they wake up, if they review that material again, then their chances of recalling it when they want to, say in the examination, will be very good.
Rajan Mahadevan represents a rare case of extraordinary memory for numbers. But research has shown that with the proper motivation and practice, we can all greatly improve our memory capacity and information processing ability. Today we know that the beautiful, complex interactions within the brain can be upset by the tiniest chemical changes. Changes caused by emotions, environmental pressures, and stress. These minuscule changes can lead to significant shifts of behavior. But how feelings and emotions work and how exactly behavior is affected by chemical changes is still largely unknown.
Anxiety and stress are the buffer between an event in the world I must interpret and the way I'm going to respond to it.
In all probability, what stressful stimuli do is they don't produce any qualitatively different responses in the brain. What they do is they change the quantity and balance of the ongoing responses that are occurring. Stress is not some physical event which occurs to the animal or to the human. It is, in fact, that is a relatively minor part of the stress event. It sets the stage for the stress response. But the stress response is going to be critically determined by the nature of the environment in which that physical stressful stimulus is embedded and what the organism can or cannot do in response to that stressful stimulus.
In the animal kingdom, stress reactions are essential for survival. Approaching danger triggers the so-called fight or flight reaction, making new energies available for the big getaway. Under stress, a neurotransmitter is released by the hypothalamus, which causes the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland, and the locus coeruleus to release chemicals which keep the organism in a constant state of excitation. An air traffic controller comes to work at the Montreal Air Traffic Control Center. His name is Claude Bizarro. Airports depend on controllers like Bizarro. Air traffic controllers are subjected to high levels of stress on the job. At the start of every shift, Claude Bizarro has to read and acknowledge the day's memos. Bizarro, 40, is a married man with 2 children, and he's a loner. Already, the inevitable routine has set up a conflict between his feelings of independence and the knowledge that he'll be spending several of the next hours, an hour on, an hour off, earning his daily bread in a large, windowless cavern.
Yes, sir.
Claude Bizarro spends his workday surrounded by high technology, guiding unseen pilots to and from Montreal's Dorval Airport. Working in both French and English only adds to the stress. Claude Belval, 40, with 2 children and a 3rd due any day, is a friend and colleague of Bizarro. Belval makes several pilgrimages a day to purchase packets of his favorite stress resistor from the machine in the cafeteria. But even during the most boring moments, there is always the fear of losing track of one of the airplanes stacked up on the board.
To Montreal, do you read me now?
And watching over them all is the new young boss, another inescapable source of stress. You can't fight your boss, nor can you flee your job. No one can predict when an airplane will have a problem.
29.5. He reported level at 24 at my frequency.
And the messages keep coming. Phone messages, boss messages, plane messages.
Second 75, Montreal. Would you confirm that you're level 240? He says he's level 24, Toronto. He's coming on 3563. Roger, second 75. Call to the Toronto Center now. Frequency 356.3. And go ahead, you're passing radial from Val-d'Or TACAN, please.
Unrelenting low-level stress keeps the messages from the limbic system flowing to the frontal cortex. The physiological reactions to stress are kept constantly at a low boil. In the world of the air traffic controller, the constant stress means that the locus coeruleus is frequently active, releasing the neurotransmitter norepinephrine in the brain. Fight or flight signals move ceaselessly from cell to cell. As more messages cross the synapses, the brain is activated again and again, keeping the organism revved up for fight or flight.
Well, I get stomach problems, yes I do. Maybe not ulcers, but I get very often gastritis, and I'm sick. My stomach is sick.
There certainly are the physiological responses which would lead to ulcers, heart disease, and cancer.
One gets to a place under that kind of severe, prolonged stress that your normal regulatory mechanisms are unable to cope with the demands that you're putting on them.
If stress is prolonged, if the brain has no chance to renew itself, the initial adaptation of the organism can be followed by exhaustion, disease, and even death.
The occurrence of that physical aggravating stimulus simply sets the stage for the stress response. That the stress response is then going to be determined by the environment in which it is embedded and what the organism can or cannot do about it.
You're unreadable. Try it again. I'm sorry, I just can't make you out. You're unreadable.
You always know that there's people on board. That's why until the last second, you're trying to do anything to separate the airplanes.
No, 3594, I'm not getting your ident feature. Try it again. Ouais.
Tu vas battre ton radar, ton parrot, là, il est désagréable, puis il va le fermer complètement.
Ah bon, c'est gentil. 5984, your radar contact. Ben, j'ai-tu le choix? Combien de temps qu'il pense travailler dessus?
Radar will be out for 2 hours.
I'm sorry, 537, I can't make you out. Try it again, please. Spacing, you're spaced according to standard of the IFR.
Well, we just want to know if we're getting close to somebody.
First air is on the, just landed now into the wing. As soon as you're well clear of traffic in Val-d'Or, we'll be able to give you lower in the wing.
The unceasing alert signals from the limbic system eventually overwhelm the frontal cortex. The ability of the locus coeruleus and the rest of the stress network to cope is exhausted. The balance between the limbic system and the cortex goes to pieces, leading to erratic behavior. Now, finally, the radar comes back on. All the airplanes are still in the air.
The ability of the cortex to communicate with the limbic system and, in fact, with the rest of the brain in an ordered manner depends critically on inhibition. Otherwise, you get random messages firing off at once.
It was getting out of hand. The radar failed on me, and I had a few aircraft that I was using radar separation, and all of a sudden I couldn't use it anymore because no more radar.
Bell Val survived the intense stress of his radar crisis, largely thanks to a neurotransmitter called GABA. GABA inhibits cells from firing, diminishing the excitatory messages reaching the frontal cortex.
What GABA seems to be able to do is to lower the excitability level of the cell that's about to receive incoming information.
But if the stress is prolonged, GABA's ability to block the passage of messages decreases. Soon, the usual process by which signals are rated for priority breaks down, and the frontal cortex is literally bombarded.
Most of the time when I'm tired, it's after a painful session. I feel tired, physically tired. Must be mentally too.
Many stress victims are helped by the benzodiazepine family of drugs, which includes Valium.
Valium is a member of a class of drugs that seems to work by improving the effectiveness of GABA transmission.
Valium addiction can occur, but the drug helps most people suffering from stress by enhancing GABA's inhibiting action. It prevents too many excitatory messages from reaching the frontal cortex. And where are the receptor sites most affected by Valium? Researchers in Copenhagen suspected they were concentrated in the parts of the brain most involved in our emotions. Their research helped establish that benzodiazepine receptor sites are concentrated in the limbic system. Receptors are seen as white specks.
If the major lesson of 20th century biology is anything, it is that most neural tissue is involved in inhibition. In a sense, if you take away most of our brain, our behavior becomes disordered, not because we are turned off, but because everything is more or less turned on at once.
Rat experiments have taught us that changing circumstances alter the impact of stress, and this knowledge has helped many human victims.
This is an experiment illustrating the effects of control in a stressful situation. What you see here are two animals, one able to control a stress stimulus delivered to its tail, whereas the second animal receives exactly the same stress stimulus. This stimulus will occur every 60 seconds unless the animal you see here in control rotates the wheel on the front of its apparatus. If it rotates the wheel after the stimulus has occurred, it will terminate the stimulus. This animal, therefore, has control over the stimulus. The animal in the other cage next to it receives exactly the same stress stimulus, except that animal does not have control over it. That animal receives the stimulus at random depending on the behavior of this animal. And what this experiment is designed to study are the physiological and neurochemical differences that occur in these animals because one has control as opposed to one having no control. And we now have pretty well established that the animal that does not have control over the stressful stimulus is by and large in much greater danger of developing stomach lesions or ulcers than does the animal that's in control. Another very important factor in stress situations is the factor of predictability. The animal that has predictability develops far less pathology and has far less of an adverse reaction, so to speak, than does the animal that cannot predict. The maximally beneficial situation to be in is one in which one not only has an effective coping or control response, but one also has very good predictability. And we can relate that to human situations, and we can simply say that in general, one is better off, one is going to develop less pathology, have a greater sense of well-being, show fewer of these neurochemical changes we've identified with either stress or depression, if one has both control and predictability.
Being multiple, I'm trying to find a word. It's hard. There's days where you wonder how things even got done. Days you just lose yourself.
Tony suffers from multiple personality disorder. He has at least 53. Among them, Tony the original, the imposter, the controller, Dee Dee, who remembers everything, Richard, a cousin who died of a brain tumor a decade ago.
When Richard talks to me, it's a different sound. Tony the imposter, it's basically the same as myself. Dee Dee, like I say, he's real different. It's unbelievable. But they're all different. They've all got their own voices. It's not where, you know, we're all the same.
Tony is a fairly fragmented multiple who, instead of having that sort of nicely free-flowing consciousness, which is a series of kind of normal, natural transitions from one state into another, is a person who really believes that he's sharing his body with a whole lot of people. And the problem with that is that he has no control when the other person is going to come out and take consciousness away from him.
No matter what I did, to be myself. There's days I can't control, where it'll just take over.
He's in too many pieces. He's, you know, just too many selves to deal with. But at least I'm able to talk to them now. They acknowledge their names to me, which is something. You know, it's a big change in him. He never did that before.
Do you know this woman?
No.
You want to ask her who she is?
Why?
Roberta.
Good.
Does that mean anything to you?
No.
Did you know that Tony is married?
Yeah, I know.
This is who he's married to.
Beautiful.
A therapy session. Tony's personalities are drawn out.
Say that like
Each is probed for its secrets.
you don't really believe me.
That's his wife, that's not my wife.
Are you married?
No.
Do you have a girlfriend?
No.
A personality change can be subtle or wrenching. A cough, a hand to the head, a movement of the eyes.
You doing all right?
Huh?
Are you doing all right?
I think so. What? I'm not doing that right?
Do you know all of these people? Why don't you let that little boy come out? That's all right. Let him come out. That's okay. Hello? Anthony? Anthony? Don't be frightened. It's okay. Do you know this lady?
Yeah.
This is Roberta. Don't be scared.
No, no, no. It's okay. I'm here.
Are you
Okay.
about 5 years old? Is there... Would that little boy like to tell me why his hand is trembling so? Hmm?
What do you want?
Richard,
What?
how are you doing? Those lights really are getting to you. Richard, do you know that little boy that was just out? That little boy whose hand shakes like that?
No.
You sure?
What did I just say?
Do you know the story about the little boy?
No.
Why does your head hurt so badly? Lots of in and out, huh? Are you the original?
Yeah.
You sure?
Sure.
Is there anybody inside you who knows everything about everyone? The so-called memory trace?
Probably Dee Dee could remember everything.
There are at least 3 Dee Dees, 7 years old, 14, 37. Tony's illness began in childhood, when most cases of multiple personality begin. Most are triggered by the need to flee psychologically from real physical or sexual abuse. Nobody yet knows what triggered Tony's.
No, there's only one Dee Dee.
Who are you?
You're learning too fast.
Am I?
Hmm.
I think the multiple, in a way, it's a kind of paradox because simultaneously he has an exaggerated ability to focus. That is, he focuses out existence altogether and substitutes an alternate existence, but also is unable to focus volitionally on anything he wants to focus on at the moment.
If the different selves don't in turn tell me, say, hey, we did this or we did that, I'm lost. I have no recollection of what happened. It's like we went to a wedding. And I swore to God, I wasn't at that wedding. I had no memory of it. The imposter took over, blanked me out the whole night. And there I am, you know, a couple days later going around asking people, did you see me there? Was I there?
How can the brain completely suppress one so-called self and focus on another? Research into multiple personality disorder is so new.
When it really hit me was when I was down in Bethesda, Maryland. I said, well, I was hoping that I proved them wrong. Because I think mainly the reason why I went down there was, well, let me go and prove these people wrong. These people ain't right.
What we know is that the brain is all the time generating electrical signals, electrical activity. If you put an electrode on the skull or on the head, you can measure spontaneous electrical activity from the brain. Now, if you stimulate that person with a flash of light or a sound or an electric shock, for example, you get an evoked electrical spike. And that's what we call an evoked potential, to distinguish it from the spontaneous electrical activity that's going on all the time, which is known as the EEG, or electroencephalogram.
Putnam and his colleagues were searching for differences in brain activity among the personalities of multiples. They matched a group of multiples with a group of normal individuals who were asked to mimic or fake new personalities. Then they tested the evoked potentials of both groups, the multiples for 3 of their personalities, the controls for 3 personalities they had invented. Among others, they tested Tony.
In Tony's case, we had 3 of his alternate personalities tested, and we tested each of these personalities for a number of days. And what you can see is that Tony, Dee Dee, and Richard show differences in the mapping of those evoked potentials across the brain.
Frank finally came into the room, and I looked at the papers, and he says, "This is your brain." And I says, "Yeah." He said, "Well, this is Dee Dee's brain. This is Tony's brain. And this is Richard's brain. There is a Dee Dee that lives inside you. There is a Richard. There is Tony, the original." I got so upset, and I felt like I was just, everything just came out of me. I had to get out of the room.
Intriguing biological differences, as seen in these evoked potentials among alter personality states, continue to be reported by investigators. In addition, Putnam and colleagues have found stable differences on repeated testings of visual acuity, ocular function, heart rate, galvanic skin response, respiratory rate, and regional cerebral blood flow. This suggests that there may, in fact, be some real bodily changes that occur when the alternate personalities are out. Together, these findings suggest that multiple personality disorder is a valid psychiatric condition that provides an important scientific window into the organization of personality and consciousness. Aggression and violence, clearly fundamentals of the animal world. But from where in an animal's brain does such behavior emanate? And if we found such a site in an animal, could this volatile area also be located in the animal part of the human brain? An early experiment to locate the whereabouts of animal rage was performed on a bull in a Spanish bull ring. This strange archival film tells the story. In the 1960s, Professor Jose Delgado took a normally hostile bull and implanted electrodes into its brain, electrodes that could be activated by a radio transmitter. His objective was to see if stimulation of the bull's midbrain could short-circuit the rage signals, stopping the bull before it reached the matador. After the bull had recovered from the implantation and in mid-charge, the button was pressed. The bull's aggression ceased instantly, or so it seemed. A clearer experiment was performed with cats. In this classic example, the hypothalamus, the rhythm maker, was implanted with electrodes. Could it be responsible not just for rhythms, but also for rage? The switch is turned. Then the switch is turned off. So indeed, the hypothalamus does control certain types of aggression. Now, how could one possibly confirm this startling finding in human beings? Meet Mark Laribas.
My name is Mark Laribas. I feel that I'm a pretty easygoing guy. Try to get along with circumstances as best as I can.
He's still a menace to society.
In the Sacramento Criminal Court, Mark Laribas was accused of assaulting and almost killing his girlfriend's 2.5-year-old daughter.
It's hard to remember. It's been quite a while ago about the incident itself with the child. But I remember her crying, and I was laying on the couch, and then all of a sudden it just really got to me. And I rushed in there, and I remember hitting her, but I don't know why. I could never pinpoint why. I mean, nobody just goes up to a child and starts beating on them for no reason like that. Even with my own daughter, if she cries, I try to ask her why she's crying. Or, in a sense, in a baby, you check them to see if they're wet or if they're hungry. But this time, it just really made me explode.
Mark Andrew Larrabus, the man accused of molesting and almost killing a 2-year-old girl, was to have had a date set today for his preliminary hearing. But Larrabus is in the University Medical Center, where doctors have discovered some sort of tumor or growth in his brain.
I first met Mark about 3 days after the assault. He had become depressed and even suicidal and was admitted to our hospital to the psychiatric unit. This allowed us to begin a diagnostic study of what might have caused the change in Mark's personality.
He couldn't understand how this act could have occurred, how he could have been responsible for this kind of behavior. And yet, as we reviewed his history, it was evident that he had been having more and more outbursts, and it had been more difficult for him to control his emotional responses to tense situations in the several weeks prior to his admission.
At first, he was very sweet, kind, and considerate, you know, just perfect gentleman, and then slowly but surely he would be getting upset all the time. It'd go like 6 months, then 3 months, and then every month, every 2 weeks, every week, and then it was every day. So it was just kind of like a gradual change, but it just kept getting worse and worse.
I could never figure out about me losing my temper so quick. I could never understand it.
He'd walk in the door and just look at me and start throwing things all over the house, come at me and strike me.
I never thought about that I might have something wrong inside my brain.
We began a series of routine studies for conditions of this sort. One of those was an X-ray called a CAT scan. In this study, we were able to demonstrate the fact that there was a shadow here at the end of the temporal lobe on the right side. This kind of finding suggests a tumor. We couldn't be sure from the initial findings what kind of tumor this was, but its location and shape at this point suggested that it was a cyst. A cyst is like a balloon, and it slowly can fill with fluid over a period of years, increasing the pressure on the structures that are adjacent to the tumor itself.
The tumor was located in an area of the brain where pressure was being exerted through the amygdala against the hypothalamus, parts of the brain thought to be involved with aggression. 5 weeks after his arrest, Mark Larrabus's tumor was surgically removed.
When I woke up from the anesthesia, everything seemed more real to me for some reason, that I could handle myself a lot better. The world seems a whole lot better for you.
He could control his temper so much better. I mean, I hadn't even seen him control it as good before as he did afterwards. And he was really willing to try to work things out between me and him.
I never thought it could be that good for me. As though, even though I was going through a criminal trial.
I'll catch you.
No.
Mark Larrabus is now back with his family. His own daughter is nearly 5 years old, and his wife is expecting another child. Mark has resumed work with his former employer. Those closest to him have now relegated his violent behavior to the past. In a sense, Mark Larrabus's bout with rage was an experiment that nature caused to happen. His actions demonstrate the dynamite charge the hypothalamus can detonate.
There we go.
While most explosions of violence cannot be dealt with by surgery, Mark's tragic experience illustrates how our animal brain invades our human days. September the 13th, 1848, near Cavendish, Vermont.
Just because a woman agrees to have her toes stepped on for one dance doesn't mean she's in love with you, James.
I suppose you're after thinking that she's taken by yourself?
Well, I'm taking her out tonight. I'll ask her for you.
You liar! I happen to know that she's visiting her parents tonight.
And how do you know that, may I ask?
Because she can only see me tomorrow night.
I don't believe it.
Well, you can ask her yourself tonight.
After it ain't last night.
One more like that, James! James, I'll go after this Dorothy myself.
This is Phineas Gage.
Come on now. Get up there and you start cutting down that brush. Benjamin, you get over here and start leveling off this timber. Now hop to it. Come on, you lot. What are you looking at? Got a lot of yards to make today. Time's money. Set in there, Billy.
Gage is an intelligent, well-balanced man.
Feeling better now, James? Yeah, that's my boy. You?
He's a modest and reliable person. He's in charge here because he can make careful, well-informed decisions. All parts of a healthy brain work together. The red emotional limbic system passes on its messages to the blue intellectual frontal cortex, the part of the brain which assigns priorities to the messages.
Everything ready, Billy? Yep. Good. Give her lots of sun, Billy boy. Lots of sun. Okay. Give her lots of sun. I need him, Jeremy! Get back there both at once! As if you want to be working here tomorrow.
Normally, the two brain systems keep thought and emotion in equilibrium.
James? James? Yeah. Good.
He's still alive.
I'm okay. Come on, help me to my feet, boys. Oh. I'm sorry. No, I'm okay. I'm sorry.
Come on, lads. Let's get him to the village.
Almost a century and a half after Gage's accident, we can guess that his limbic system, frontal cortex, and the connections between the two were damaged by the passage of the tamping iron through his brain. The limbic system is now free to fire emotional messages without the restraint exercised by the frontal cortex. But why did Gage feel so little pain? Normally, pain signals move up the spinal column to stations in the brain which pass on the messages to the frontal cortex. At the microscopic level of the neural net, information is passed on from cell to cell. It's through this system that the pain messages reach the frontal cortex. The passage of pain messages occurs partly through a chemical called substance P, which is projected across the tiny gap, the synapse, from one cell to the next. If enough of the chemical reaches the receptors of the next cell, the cell fires and the pain messages continue. Often when pain or stress occurs, endorphins are released. Endorphins are the natural morphines of the brain. Gage's pain was probably lessened by endorphins, diminishing the transmission of substance P across the synaptic gap.
Come on, you can make it, man.
Here, take this, it'll help you feel better.
Sometimes just believing in a cure is enough to dampen pain. Water has no pain-killing properties, but it may have given Phineas Gage some relief by triggering the release of more pain-resisting endorphins.
Oh, better.
If Gage had taken morphine, it would have inhibited cell firing by impairing the transmission of substance P, just as the endorphins do, blocking the pain signals.
Hurry, doctor. It's bad. I'm coming.
The young Edward Williams, a former railroad man himself, was the first doctor summoned.
Can you walk?
Yes. Let us through. The man's hurt.
Tapping iron went right through his head, Eddie.
Science's great interest in Phineas Gage was in how the severing of his frontal cortex from his limbic system completely changed his behavior and character.
Come on, Phineas. Let us take you up to bed.
Oh, no. Leave me alone. I just want to stay outside.
Phineas, you'd be better inside.
I'm staying right here!
It's Doc Williams. Who? Doc Williams.
Doc Williams. He is working up for you, Doctor.
Oh, my gosh.
Gage's words were prophetic. His historic case sparked widespread curiosity into how physical changes in the brain affect behavior.
God, Gage.
I don't know.
Okay, enough of this nonsense, Phineas. Let's get you off to bed right now. Come on, come on.
Oh, no.
Easy, easy.
Samuel. Oh, back to work, eh, boys?
Come on, in the house. Come on. Come on, easy.
I think I've got the last piece of bones. Want to check, see if there's anything else down there. My right hand is touching my left hand, clear through his head.
Once the connections between the frontal cortex and the limbic system are gone, the limbic system is free to fire its messages of emotion uninhibited by the frontal cortex, and behavior becomes erratic and unpredictable.
You know what I like, Doctor? I like to have my old dog up here. Come here, Biff! Here, boy! Come on!
Keep your head still.
Oh, Billy! Billy! Oh, wait.
Keep your head still.
Oh, I have to see the man, eh? Hey!
Easy, easy. Lie back. Let's see what we can do about your dog, Phineas.
Go get Biff, Billy. Go get Biff, eh? Biff died. Biff, now!
Lie back. Lie back. Lie back.
I'm going to sleep.
Against all odds, Gage survived. Physically. But he never did regain his emotional and intellectual self-control, balance, and judgment. His ability to communicate with other human beings decreased, but he developed a special affinity for animals. But for the men Gage used to work with, he had become a man out of control. The balance between his emotions and his intellectual faculties destroyed.
Hey, wait up, man! Hey, don't leave without your foreman, hey! Oh! Oh! Oh!
We got a new foreman.
What?
Who? I'm the foreman now.
You? Benjamin. Oh. Oh, you can't take care of yourself, Benjamin, let alone a whole group of men, eh? Oh. Oh. I'm still in charge, eh?
We hope you'll be back, Phineas, but not today.
Hey, how can you take my job? Phineas Gage! I'm a better man than you, any day! The best foreman!
We'll come by later, Phineas.
I'm the best. No! Not that way! We're still at the cutting. The work's over there, and the explosion. Explosion? Oh.
It was not the man that was Gage.
He's like an animal now.
An animal's emotions in a man's body.
Gage died 12 years later, still unbalanced. At the Warren Museum at Harvard University, the tamping rod and Gage's skull are preserved, a monument to research into how physical changes in the brain affect behavior. Utilizing the most modern tools of brain science investigation, Doctors Hannah and Antonio Damasio at the University of Iowa Neurology Laboratory have studied Phineas Gage's skull and the tamping rod. They have been able to anatomically determine which areas of his brain were the most seriously damaged. Their investigation has revealed major damage to both prefrontal cortical areas, more extensively on the left side. This region is reciprocally connected with the subcortical nuclei involved with emotional processing in the amygdala and hypothalamus. When the prefrontal region is damaged in this way, an individual may not be able to control emotions that originate in these subcortical structures. This was profoundly evident in Phineas Gage.
For information on this program and others in the Annenberg CPB collection, call 1-800-LEARNER.